Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of God. Average Folks in the Afterlife, number 54. And as promised, we're going to move into Paul Elder's Eyes of an Angel. Done about 12, 14 years ago. It's more or less a spiritual autobiography focusing on his out-of-body experiences. He had a near-death experience when he was 12, which undoubtedly loosened up those bodies. They always do. At least that's my contention. You have a near-death experience where your astral is, how shall we say, through the crisis or trauma, forced out and then brought back in by resuscitation or, whatever. That somewhat loosens the bonds and can often lead to more, how shall we say, natural NDEs, not NDEs, OBEs later. And I think this is what happened with Mr. Elder. Interesting enough, he had another NDE when he was 41, playing hockey on an old-timers team and exerting himself far too much, and had another NDE. But in between, he was exploring his consciousness carefully. And as you will see, it started out on his own, and then he found the books of Robert Monroe and went to the Institute in Virginia and had more interesting experiences there, as everyone does when they go. Anyway, let's get started. I had gone to bed early, quickly falling into a deep sleep. After about an hour and a half, I jerked awake as intense vibrations coursed through my body. Every molecule of my being seemed to be buzzing with electricity. A high-pitched squeal resonated in my ears. I was ecstatic. This is what I've been working for. This time fear would not stop me. I was in such a hurry to make it happen that I even forgot to offer my prayer for protection. I simply thought, up, and in an instant I was floating near the ceiling of my bedroom. It was almost too fast. A momentary feeling of disappointment came over me. I hadn't experienced the increase in vibration or the elation of pulling away from my body. I had just transported instantly to the ceiling. I've been there. Below me in the bed lay my body, mesmerized. I studied the sleeping form. It seemed so odd to be doing this. I felt compassion and gratitude toward this body that had served me well for so many years. The blankets had slipped down to just above my waist, and it looked like I might be chilly. My wife was asleep on her right side with her left arm draped across my chest. I thought about the many years Candace and I had been together and our constant disagreement over what temperature in the house should be. She preferred the bedroom cool at night, while I liked it a bit warmer. It had been warm enough when I got into bed, but as usual it appeared that sometime during the night she had turned down the thermostat and opened a window. I turned to my right. Sure enough, a cool breeze rustled the curtains in front of the open window. Sound like a marriage to you? I remember why I liked to be warm at night. There were far too many vivid childhood memories of winter nights when the fire in the wood stove, the only source of heat in our house, had gone out. Often after nights like that, my brother and I would wake up clinging to each other like puppies trying to keep warm. These things I didn't want to experience again, but they were far removed from the life my wife enjoyed while growing up in the city. I had to pull myself away from my musings. It might not be long before I'd have to return to my body. With increasing excitement, I was ready for a new adventure, having decided at first to try a tour through the house. And then I pivoted around to face the doorway, but the door was closed. Damn, I cussed. Why does she always have to close the door? But I remembered I'd floated through the wall during my first excursion. Wondering if it would work again, I braced myself and headed slowly toward the solid door. Half expecting to crash headlong into the panel, I raised my hands in front of me to absorb the impact. Instead, I sailed through with ease. I could feel the material of the door as I passed through. It felt a bit like moving through warm water, but with no resistance. Yes, that is it's one of the strangest experiences when you start out, the texture of the various walls, doors, windows. ceilings, floors that you pass through. If you go through slowly, you do feel the texture. And then you start your brain sort of tries to analyze the texture in terms of other experiences you've had. If you go through quickly, which one learns to do, that doesn't happen. On the other side of the door, I stopped and floated to the floor. It was too tempting to resist, so just for the thrill of it, I reached back and pushed my arm elbow deep into the door. Talk about a weird sensation. I could only see half my arm. The rest of it was undoubtedly waving about on the other side of the door. Chuckling, I envisioned what this might look like back in the bedroom. I knew that if I were on the other side seeing something like this, I'd be under the covers with the phone dialing Ghostbusters. I didn't know you could dial Ghostbusters. With my arm still embedded in the wood, I slowly put my forehead against the smoothness of the door and pushed. Instantly, my head passed through, and I found myself looking back into the bedroom. Everything was as I had left it, my wife and my body seemingly sound asleep. Stepping fully through the door into the bedroom, I began to talk to myself. Unfrickin' believable. Standing for a moment, I looked around, and then, confident everything was okay, I turned and stepped back through the door into the hallway. A world of possibilities opened before me. Was there any kind of structure I couldn't go through? Maybe steel would be a problem, I thought. I'll have to check that out sometime. It seemed nothing could hold me back. Leaping into the air, I floated down the stairway into the living room. Slowly, I flew up the 2-story open ceiling just to see what it would be like to be that high off the floor. It was exhilarating. I was flying. I was actually flying. I could hardly contain myself. Like a kid whose wildest fantasy had come true, I swooped down from the ceiling, passed through the wall and into the dining room, and continued on into the kitchen. The feeling of flying through solid objects was irresistible. Before long, I was zooming back and forth through the walls like Casper, the friendly ghost. As I zipped through the wall of the family room into an adjacent bedroom, I came to a mid-air stop. It was my 8-year-old son's bedroom. Floating silently near the ceiling, I gazed down as David slept. My heart flooded with compassion for this gentle little soul. He was one of the happiest people I'd ever known, always a smile on his face. Nothing seemed to get him down for long. Even at this young age, he had a wonderful sense of humor. With a warm and generous heart, he had empathy for anyone less fortunate. David's was the bright and cheery attitude I wished I had. From my perspective, he was beautiful. As I floated near the ceiling, my daughter Stacy came to mind. Her bedroom was directly above David's. Traveling straight up through the floor, I was soon hovering over her bed. We were so proud of our little girl. Pretty and petite, Stacy had dedication, intelligence, and perseverance to accomplish anything she wanted in life. She possessed such great inner strength and, at the same time, a wonderful sensitivity to others. At 11, she was entering that awful hormone stage. We were often amused and amazed at the transformation taking place before us. One moment she'd be our sweet little girl singing her dollies to sleep, and the next she would become a mature young lady trying to convince her mother that she was definitely old enough to stay at Alicia's party until 10 p.m. I was about to move closer so that I could see more of that dimpled little face when a huge spasm suddenly jolted through me, and in an instant I got snapped back to my body. What could possibly have happened? I sat up, opening my eyes. Candace was now facing the other direction. She must have turned over in her sleep, bumping my body as she withdrew the arm that had been lying across my chest. Disappointed at being forced back so soon, I still rejoiced in having been able to go out of body again. A very typical early trip that. Many of you will have had something similar. And if you're working up to something like that, that's often what happens, floating around the house. And either you're alone in the house or there's other family members. And it's often so exciting that's about as far as you get before you sort of whip through the window and out into the neighborhood. Fortunately, every now and then, this is somewhat later that same year, I would find myself briefly dozing off, then abruptly snapping back to the awareness of intense vibrations already coursing through my body. I would hear a familiar high-pitched tone and simply wish myself into the air. Then, after checking on my body, I would be off on another adventure. I don't know why, but I always look back at my body. It wasn't necessary, but I felt compelled to do it. On one of those occasions, I happened to be cruising through the kitchen looking for something to do. When I spotted the fridge, I had an idea. Poking my head through the door, I looked for any leftover dessert I could eat when I finished my excursion. For some reason, the darkness inside the fridge caught me by surprise. Reminded of an old silly joke, I had to chuckle at my expectation that the light would automatically switch on. After a few amusing moments, I simply stated my intention to see better, and in an instant, I could identify every object in the fridge. Unfortunately, there was no dessert. But I soon returned in my physical body to gobble up the leftover ham and scalloped potatoes. In the early stages, I felt safer staying with the familiar walls of my home, but that soon became boring. One night near the end of summer, I woke from a deep sleep to a pressure of rapidly escalating vibrations. Looking up, I found I could see right through the ceiling into the night sky. A beautiful full moon beckoned, and I decided it was about time that I sucked up my courage and ventured outdoors. Yes, you will have those experiences sometimes where you can see right through the wall while you're still there, and it can throw you. It really can. Floating effortlessly to the ceiling, I wondered what it would feel like to go through that yucky, itchy fiberglass insulation in the attic. With some nervousness, I moved slowly through the ceiling and into the attic space. The insulation was hardly noticeable. Relieved, I continued up through the tops of the rafters. A moment later, I was standing on the roof. The freedom was exhilarating. Delighted with the ease of the maneuver, I thought how wonderful it would be to float up into the sky. Impelled by this simple thought, I lifted off the roof and ascended. Rising to about 100 feet, I stopped and hovered. I could see the entire neighborhood. It was after midnight, so very few houses were lit. I mused about how freaked out my neighbors would be if they only knew what was happening in the sky above them. Slowly I moved higher, stopping at around 500 feet. It was beautiful. Lights were visible for miles around. I thought it might be fun to take an aerial tour of the city, but just as I began to move down the block, a strange tugging sensation began to draw me back to my body. I didn't want to end the experience, but the tugging was persistent. When I could no longer resist, I gave in, surrendering to the pull. In an instant, I was slapped into my body with such force that it shook the bed. It was no big deal, as it turned out, just my bladder begging to be relieved. Yes, another common issue. Bladders. The next opportunity came sooner than expected. Just 3 days later, too tired to think about spiritual journeys, I flopped onto the bed and immediately fell asleep. Less than an hour later, I awoke to a shrill frequency resonating in my ears. Sleepily, I closed my eyes and mentally recited my little prayer for assistance and protection. The sound in my ears seemed to intensify as I tried to gain control. Perhaps I thought I could use the sound as a trigger to evoke the necessary increase in vibrations. Experimenting, I found I was able to control its intensity, but could detect little change in my inner body vibration. After a while, when I could no longer maintain my concentration, I gave up and simply fell asleep. Unexpectedly, just a few moments later, I again jerked back into full consciousness. The sound was now a high-pitched squeal. A strong vibration flowed through my body. I was actually ready for another journey. Deciding to take it slower this time, I floated leisurely to the ceiling. Skimming horizontally, I was heading for the bedroom door when I decided to try something different. Changing directions, I plunged through the north wall of my bedroom. Expecting to come out the other side near the high open ceiling of the living room, I found myself instead in a small darkened space about 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. There was a large metal pipe in the middle of it. It took me a few seconds to figure out where I was. I had forgotten the large fireplace chimney on the other side of the wall. As I drifted inside the brick enclosure, I realized that my arm and part of my right shoulder were embedded in the chimney pipe, and I pulled back in disgust. Imagining how black and dirty my hand and arm were going to be, I pushed through the stone mantel and into the living room. My arm, of course, was perfectly clean. I began to laugh at how bizarre and silly the whole thing was. When every touchstone of our reality is based on the physical world, it's difficult to leave the old concepts behind. Suit or no suit, I was going to enjoy this outing. Rather than going up through the roof, I decided this time to exit through the front wall of the house onto the street. I slid easily through the inner wall and the outer brick facade. But as I was coming out the other side, something struck me as odd. I was sure that I had automatically closed my eyes as I passed through the wall. I wondered if I could ever get used to the differences between astral and material worlds. Everything was strange. To begin with, I wasn't sure how I was able to see. Obviously, it wasn't through my physical eyes, so I decided to pay more attention to those pesky little physical quirks. Propelled by a small burst of energy, I floated out into the quiet street and up into the night sky. Stunningly beautiful, the sky appeared to have a special glow. As several clouds floated nearby, I noticed what appeared to be an energy halo around them. It reminded me of the aurora borealis. Shades of luminous blue, pink, and violet began to swirl, merge, and dance together in a brilliant display of choreography. Captivated, I watched in awe, my attention drawn to the iridescence of one cloud. It seemed to be increasing in brightness and intensity, becoming more and more animated. Suddenly, a terrific flash lit up the sky. A dazzling arc of blue-white light erupted from the bottom of the cloud and slammed into the ground. Startled, I realized it was nothing more than lightning. But in my out-of-body state, it was a sight to behold. I hadn't noticed the approaching thunderstorm, but the developing view was sensational. I could actually see electrical energy building up in the cloud before it exploded into the ground. I studied the sky as the same cloud began to sparkle and dance, building in intensity once more. Soon it was a boiling vortex of power. I watched intently as the shimmering energy, swirling like a miniature hurricane, slowly edged its way to the top of the cloud. The bubbling formation arched across the top towards the center, and then, like a whirlpool draining through a funnel, collapsed in on itself, firing off a bolt of electricity into the ground below. Strangely, a jagged arc of orange light seemed to erupt simultaneously from the ground, leaping into the air to greet the incoming charge. It was beautiful. I would never again look at a prairie thunderstorm in the same way, and I thanked God for this wonderful gift. If this was what it was like to be an angel, if this is what angels were able to see, then I wanted to be an angel. As I continued to soak up the spiritual beauty of nature, my physical self-preservation senses began to kick in. I wondered whether I should be out in this kind of weather. As I think back on it now, I find it amusing. But at that point in my journey, I had no idea what boundaries existed. I knew that you don't mess around in a lightning storm. I may have wanted to be an angel, but not right at that moment. Reluctantly, I headed back home through the large kitchen window. Passing through the double-paned glass was easy, almost imperceptible. Back inside, I floated through the house and into my bedroom. I didn't want the excursion to end yet. I wanted to play and thought it would be nice to have a playmate to share the experience. Well, he then tries to get his wife to leave her body by encouraging her, but it doesn't work. Tries a number of different little stunts, and none of them seem to work. And when he speaks to his wife later, she doesn't really remember any attempt at communication. Again, this is something you'll see comes up over and over again in various people's memoirs. Now, we're moving on to his first experience at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, where he's part of a class going through the various focus levels. And from focus 12, mind awake, body asleep, and expanded awareness, and then into focus 15, the consciousness level beyond linear time. Without going into a mini lecture on how Robert Monroe classified the various levels of consciousness, suffice to say that he assigned them focus numbers. And you can study it at your leisure. A good place to be is focus 27. That's the, shall we say, the last of the afterlife planes, 23, 24, 25, 26, which is, he feels, was created by free spirits in order to accommodate the needs and ambitions of those who are, those explorers who are beyond belief system territory, shall we say, who don't feel that religions or cultures provide sufficient individual freedom. And so there's this level called Focus 27 where, as far as we can tell, there are no overriding belief systems other than you're free to do what you want. By the third day, I was nearly bouncing off the walls. The energy flowing through my body was so strong that a tingling vibration rippled from my thighs all the way up to the back of my neck. The high-pitched tone, normally only present when I was in an altered state, now seemed to be with me all the time. By late afternoon, as we headed to our room for another session, the sound in my ears had become so loud I worried that it might be distracting. After settling into the relaxing hemisync tones, I could feel the changes slowly spreading through my body. At first, as my thoughts drifted, I began to lose all awareness of anything physical. But when I finally refocused my attention, I couldn't believe the amount of electrical activity playing through my muscles. I could feel my lower legs tense up and then slowly relax. The stiffness and tightness moved to my thighs, which slowly also contracted and then relaxed. Soon the lower half of my body began to feel heavy and immovable. Floating ever closer to the borderland of sleep, as had happened so many times before, my consciousness began to click in and out. One moment I would be awake and alert, and the next I'd be snapping back to awareness, knowing only that I'd somehow fallen asleep. It was from one of these unconscious voids that I suddenly clicked back into awareness, just as I was lifting off the bed, floating toward the ceiling. My excitement was almost uncontainable. As I approached the ceiling, I turned as usual to look down at my body. But this time there was something different. I didn't seem to be in control of what was happening. I kept on rising through the ceiling of my check unit. Before I knew it, I was sailing right through the lower body of a participant in the unit above me. Startled, but only somewhat concerned, I floated up through the roof of the Institute. With every molecule buzzing, I began rising into the sky. 100 feet, 500 feet, 1,000 feet. I quickly picked up speed, moving ever higher. Soon, watching the landscape shrink below me, I felt like a rocket blasting into space. This, I thought, must be what the shuttle crews see as they leave the Earth. The Virginia landscape became a blur of green as I moved higher. To my right, the vast sweep of ocean blue came into view, and I still continued climbing. Within moments, the entire planet became visible as I hurtled into space. The sun took on a distinct brilliance I had never seen before. Moving ever faster, I continued on until the Earth itself appeared as a tiny blue ball. Finally, many thousands of miles into space, I slowed down and came to a stop. The panorama was stunning. In every direction, I could see and feel the beauty of creation. A blanket of stars lay in every direction. It occurred to me how small and insignificant I was in the midst of this beautiful sea of creation. Yet I knew I was part of it all. Everything was intimately connected, and perhaps even the tiniest particle was no less important than the largest. Little touch of cosmic consciousness there. For an indeterminate period, I floated quietly in space, absorbed in the beauty around me. Monroe was right. This level of consciousness, Focus 15, was unaffected by time. Yes, Monroe is often right. In my contented solitude, I became aware of a strange, distracting sound. It seemed to surround me, while at the same time resonate within me. Although I couldn't point its source, it appeared to be a deep, low frequency like the roaring of the wind or a pounding ocean surf. Continuing to grow louder, I soon found it impossible to ignore. Concerned, I thought perhaps I should get back to my body. In one swift movement, only a flicker in time, I snapped back to my body in the check unit. To my astonishment, I could still hear the sound, and it was even louder. Then the realization hit me. The sound was coming from me. It was my body snoring. Well, I think there's another interesting experience here. As one of our last sessions got underway, I began to contemplate how I might integrate some of the new things I had been learning and how I could, push them into another meaningful experience. Offering my usual prayer for protection, I also asked to be given an experience that would benefit me most at this stage in my development. I sent a prayer out to the universe and trusted it would all go as intended. Then I relaxed and waited. The frequencies carried me deeper and deeper into deeper consciousness, and time seemed to drag. I was beginning to wonder if I'd get any response when a sudden, powerful surge in vibration swept through me. In the next instant, I almost leapt out of my skin. There at the foot of my bed, bathed in light, stood a blonde-haired boy. It startled me so much I had to fight the urge to jump out of bed and turn on the lights. I saw him clearly. He appeared to be about 12. His freckled face and sparkling blue eyes beamed with delight. I didn't know what to do. Who was he? Should I try and talk to him or say hi? As I struggled to control my fear, an expression of understanding and compassion spread across his face. I was sure he knew my thoughts. As if in apology for frightening me, he smiled ever so gently, lowered his eyes, and in an instant was gone. A heavy sadness flooded through me. I couldn't get over feeling that this young spirit had wanted to communicate, and I had let him down. Why hadn't I been able to deal with my fears? Perhaps he could have helped me. I wondered if I'd ever see him again or find out who he was. Through the remainder of the session, I repeatedly invited him back, but it was not to be. Ah, yes, this is a good one. When the final session got underway, my consciousness dropped quickly as a persistent numbing sensation enveloped my legs. Ready for another adventure, I knew that I would shortly start to feel electrical spasms in my body. For a moment I seemed to fall asleep, but snapped back with the usual jolt. I had been startled yet again by the sound of my own snoring. This was amazing, as ordinarily I seldom snore. On rare occasions when it did happen, I would usually be immersed in a deep sleep. I began to think about the autonomic processes of the body and how complex and intricate our physiology is. How ridiculous the official accepted view of our reality had become. Our scientific community was still insisting that we and all that we have become were the result of a freak accident in which precise quantities and types of amino acids came together in a primeval pond scum and evolution take care of the rest. Oh, yay, science. Cheers. How ignorant that was. At one time I may have been brought into such concepts, but I wanted to deny the existence of a creator, or because I wanted to deny the existence of a creator. But even though I had preferred this left brain linear view of the universe, deep inside it didn't sit comfortably. I knew intuitively there had to be something more. Now I was living and learning about this something more. Now I was experiencing firsthand the beauty and complexity of creation. I was beginning to understand the order in which everything existed. The more I thought about our existence, the more intrigued I became with the concept of consciousness. Where exactly was the seat of consciousness within a human? Oh ho ho ho. There isn't one. There isn't a seat of consciousness within the human. We are consciousness and we float in a sea of consciousness. Trust me on that one. If the seat of consciousness is within the brain, as science dictates, then what was it that allowed me to travel thousands of miles away from my brain and remain a thinking, self-aware individual? Good question. It was becoming obvious to me that consciousness is not at all dependent upon the brain. The brain is only a secondary factor in control of our physical existence. It is merely an electronic relay system, something that translates the mind's thoughts into actions and reactions within our bodies. I began to wonder if it would be possible to focus the thinking process another location within the body other than the brain. Would it be possible, for example, to move my consciousness into my foot? I wanted to try, but couldn't imagine how this might be accomplished. I decided just to go for it. Almost immediately, I felt a change in internal vibration, and my perception became clouded and confused. I hadn't a clue where I was, but I could feel the flow of liquid surging past me in a steady rhythm. Too disoriented to make any sense of what was happening, I decided to withdraw to an external point of view. After a brief feeling of movement, I found myself floating several inches away from my right foot. I had somehow become a mere microscopic version of myself, with no perception of having any type of body. It felt like I had been reduced to the tiniest spark of conscious energy. Reorienting myself, I settled on re-entering my leg just above the ankle. In an instant, I found myself back where I had started. It felt like I was inside a main artery, but with my vision extremely blurred, I couldn't be sure. If this was going to be of any value at all, I needed to be able to see. I recalled the incident within the darkness of my refrigerator and thought if it worked once, it should work again. I asked for clarity. Almost as quickly as the thought entered my mind, everything around me became clearly into focus. The sensation was overwhelming, almost too much to handle. Surrounded in a flood of red and pink, a beam of light seemed to come from within me, lighting the way. It reminded me of TV medical shows where tiny cameras had been inserted through small holes in a patient's body. I could feel the flow of the liquid surging past me, and I could hear the sound of blood swishing through the artery. It seemed as though I was moving steadily along against the flow of blood pulled in the direction of my upper body. In just a few moments, the sound of swooshing liquid swelled, and I knew I had arrived at the center of my body. Surprised at the loudness of my pumping heart, I jostled about, the motion and flow of blood agitated and powerful. But why, I wondered, was my heart beating so fast? It seemed a lot faster than usual. Considering the possibility that my own mental excitement might be contributing to the increased pounding, I decided I should find another place to hang out. This was new territory for me, and I wasn't quite sure how this might be affecting my body. As I thought of other places to go, I felt a tug at my consciousness, distracting me, drawing me out of my altered state. I tried to resist, but to no avail. A moment later, I was back to normal consciousness, wondering what had happened. At some point during the session, I had rolled over onto my side. The headphones digging into the side of my head had become extremely uncomfortable, and that's all it took. Thrilled with my short excursion, I lay in bed contemplating the potential inner body work, how this might be in terms of results for medicine. If trained medical people could be taught to make similar journeys into parents' bodies, the diagnostic possibilities could be enormous. Maybe this was how Edgar Cayce, the famous medical psychic, had been able to give accurate readings on the medical conditions of his clients. If only this inner body exploration could be duplicated at will, I thought, the ramifications for future could be exciting. Yes, turning yourself into a sort of microscopic point of consciousness, as he did there. I'm not sure how many other experiences have done this. It seems to me I've read of it 2 or 3 times, although I couldn't point to you where exactly. But I will say this. There's a book called Occult Chemistry, and it's a record of the explorations of Charles Ledbetter, the Theosophist, and I believe Annie Besant, from, easily 100 years ago, perhaps a little longer. And they had been able, through, I believe, instruction from one of the ascended masters, who the Theosophists were fairly regularly in touch with, or at least some of them. Although there's, always the usual doubters that say they were faking it, but I don't think they were. They had been shown an occult method, or what would be described in their day as an occult method, of how to reduce their consciousness to very small levels. And at that point, they entered and tried to see and explore the inside of the atom. And this was radical stuff in their day. I don't think science was able to do it at that point. So and they obviously wrote down their memories of the experience after coming out of the altered state. And if the book might be online, I'm not sure. I've seen various print versions of it. It's not very long, but it's old and out of print, so the print version will cost you a couple of bucks. But if it's online, Occult Chemistry, you will see that they were able to do that and envision certain, how shall we say, what we would now call neurons and protons and that sort of a thing inside the atom, and they drew them, etc., etc. So I think we can see here how the consciousness of explorers, aspirants, disciples on the inner path, the inner spiritual path of exploration that does not lead to devotion to a prophet or devotion to a guru, but leads to expanded personal consciousness, that path, I think you can see how its progress, the vibratory increase of the physical plane and the more spiritual maturity of the current generation of explorers, as I've pointed out in some of my essays, is greater than the vanguard of brave, fearless theosophists of 100, 150 years ago. To me, this point is undeniable. You have to do a lot of reading to find out, but I'm helping you along on that one. So consider that. People, the spiritualists and the theosophists of 150 years ago laid down the paths that we are following, laid down the paths for modern man freed from the dogmas of religion. And I say the dogmas of science too. I don't know which is the worst, to tell you the truth. And so with that, we'll finish for today, and definitely more from Paul Elder's Eyes of an Angel next time. As I think you'll agree, it's a great little book for comparing your own inner journeys and your own attempts too. We all need little maps and guidebooks, and I did too when I was starting out. And eventually, as we get through this reading series, we'll get to a couple of books that were pretty influential on me many moons back. And until then, I wish you all, what did I say yesterday? Serenity in the face of all this turmoil and disturbance. Unless you're living in a remote cabin in the hills without television and internet, in which case you may just be serene anyway. And if you are, God bless you. Bye now.